Hello there, and welcome to our panel on cool distilling. Cool distilling, vacuum distilling, reduced pressure distillation. It comes with many names. It is a technique that has been growing in popularity. It has occurred to me that maybe some people don't know so much about it, and they should. It's a really cool thing, and you should learn about it. So we've gathered some really amazing people here today to talk about their experiences and give you some advice if you're looking at getting into cool vacuum or reduced pressure distillation. So firstly, we're going to introduce everybody. If we could start off with yourself, Alex.
Hi there, I'm Alex Griffiths, one half of Griffiths Brothers. We're based in the Chiltern Hills and we've been going since the end of 2016. We fully cool distill all of our gins, and our basic setup, we started out with a 25 litre rotary evaporator, and then kind of the following year we followed up with a 100 litre rotary evaporator. So we're rotary evaporators all the way, which has worked for us.
Lovely, thank you. And yourself, Ian?
My name is Ian Hart. I started off Sacred Distillery back in 2008. I started just with a rotovap, a little baby 2 litre one, not up to 100 litre size. To scale up from that, I decided not to go for any dynamic joints. So we now use a system which of 5 different 10 litre vacuum stills, which you can pump down, seal off, and just pump warm water and cold water, and they do the distilling by themselves. So we have a system which is essentially a sequence of jacketed stills, and everything is interchangeable. Something breaks, you slot a new piece in. So it's like a system that I have going there. You can see pictures on our website, which is sacredgin.com.
Fantastic. And yourself, Matthew?
Hello, my name is Matthew Pawley. I am Assistant Professor of Distilling at Heriot-Watt University in Edinburgh. I was the first Oxley distiller and was part of the commercialisation team of the first generation Oxley still, fresh out of university in 2007, and then went on to commercialise that and sort of tweak it and change the scale. And now I'm an Assistant Professor of Distilling.
Wonderful. And yourself, Abby?
Hi, yeah, so I'm Abby Nielsen. I'm co-founder of Cooper King Distillery, and we make gin and whiskey. So we make sustainable spirits distilled with craftsmanship, honesty and adventure is our tagline. I'm also creator of England's first carbon negative gins. I'm an ex-scientist, and the distillery was inspired by an adventure to Australia a few years ago, and my partner and I came back to Yorkshire to self-build and crowdfund a distillery just near York. So we've been vacuum distilling gin now for over 3 years. I went straight in with a rotary evaporator, a vacuum still, so I didn't even bother with hot distillation for gin. And I use a 5 litre benchtop rotary evaporator from the manufacturer Bucky.
Marvellous. And finally, yourself, Chris?
Hi, I'm Chris Gordon, the head distiller at Heppel Spirits, and we combine vacuum distillation with copper pot distillation and supercritical extraction, 3 separate processes that we bring the products of those processes together and combine them to make our gin. We have a Bucky 25 litre vacuum still, and I first came across vacuum distillation when I was head distiller at Sipsmith, where we had a 2 litre benchtop still that we really wasn't involved in the process for making sips of gin, but we used to have a lot of fun with it.
Marvellous. Thank you so much. I'm so excited that I've got you all in the same room. So yeah, really, really excited about the conversation today. Let's start off with the basics. What is cool vacuum reduced pressure distillation? If we could go to you, Ian, first, if that's okay.
Okay, so atmospheric pressure is about 1,025 millibars at sea level. I think that I've never got into the SI units. I think that's 115 kilopascals. Anyway, I like thinking to myself, there's 1,000 millibars in atmospheric pressure, and actually air is quite dense and quite rich. If you take away 90% of the air in a chamber, you've still got an awful lot of pressure there. I mean, 100 millibars is still quite a decent pressure. I think it's about 10 times the atmospheric pressure on Mars, for example. And you know, you get tornadoes and dust levels on Mars. So actually 100 millibars, which is our typical distillation pressure, is not really anywhere close to a vacuum. And the closest to a vacuum that you get is probably deep space, or in certain sort of like NASA reactors, or scientific stainless steel chambers for inside the old cathode ray TV tubes and things. So I think it's quite right to say that vacuum distillation is really shorthand for low pressure distillation. And the point about that is, with 1,000 millibars of atmospheric pressure pressing down on a hot cup of coffee, the bubbles that want to form inside will not form, because atmospheric pressure is keeping those bubbles pressed down. If you try and boil an egg at base camp, however, up halfway or however far up Mount Everest, you'll find that boiling point of water will go down to the 60s. So bit by bit, as the atmospheric pressure is removed, the bubbles can form, and that is the benefit of low pressure vacuum distillation. You can distill things at a much lower temperature, and in fact, at around 100 millibars, about 1/10 of an atmosphere, we end up distilling between about 25 and 35 centigrade. And critically, that's below the spoilage point for certain natural materials, whether it's the difference between a fresh cut orange and a boiled orange in making marmalade, or juniper or coriander seed. Everything tastes much fresher and lusher when you distill at a lower temperature. And that's what vacuum or low pressure distillation enables to do. It's as simple as that.
Brilliant, thank you. That's a really, really good example, an explanation of what happens there. I know I've written about this subject a few times, and it did take myself a little bit to get my head around it, because I'm not so sciencely minded. I think getting in at the basics is really important for some of the people that will be watching. Not everybody's familiar with it, so I'm really glad you've covered that. Thank you. Moving on, what would you say are the advantages over normal pot distillation? I'm going to direct this to somebody just to get it started, but please feel free to jump in as well. If we could start off with you, Matthew.
Okay, so yeah, the advantages on a molecular level, as Ian briefly touched on, is because you're extracting at a lower temperature, you're extracting the molecules, which are in some instances really large, complicated molecules, only without heating them. You're not taking those large, fragile molecules and smashing them up by applying excess sort of kinetic energy in the form of heat. So what you're doing is, by reducing the pressure, you're pushing the equilibrium in the direction of vapor at a lower temperature. So you're taking these fantastic, gorgeous molecules that are really sort of delicate and intricate, and then you're not applying any heat. So you're extracting them, and they're still maintaining the structural integrity as they are found in nature. So you're really getting a much cleaner extraction, giving you a much kind of brighter and crisper and sort of nature-like. I don't want to use nature identical, because that has a specific meaning within the flavour industry, but it's as you would find them in the natural products. You know, and you're not getting some of the interactions as well, because stills are sort of like chaos engines. So we're putting molecules in and we're extracting them, but also having molecules interacting with each other. So we have a different level and different sorts of interaction between the molecules. So that's the real benefit behind it. Not to say that, you know, there isn't a place for conventional distilling, because, you know, that's also quite interesting too.
Fab. And if I could come to you as well, Abby, because I know you've got insight on the changes in flavour, and you're really into that. If you could give us a bit on that, that'd be great. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, certainly just to mirror what Matthew was saying, for us, we've always wanted like a really bright, fresh and clean gin. So like the vacuum distillation was our only option for that, really. And the clarity of flavour that we get, you know, what you put in is exactly what you get out, which I love. So you have ultimate control. But even so much as like a 5-degree temperature change can have a significant effect on the flavour output of a particular botanical. So, you know, we distill a lot with lemongrass. That's one of our signature botanicals. And just a 5-degree temperature change can mean the difference between beautiful, silky, citrusy, clean sort of lemon flavour and, you know, a funky, it's almost like glue or toilet cleaner. So it's having that control for us. Some of the main advantages for us as well is it's really flexible. You know, you can control the temperature. You're not just set to cold. You can go right up to, you know, 60, 70, 80 degrees if you want to. So you can push botanicals to the warmer side. You can distill super cold. So the flexibility is fantastic. It's also really efficient. I mentioned in my intro there that we've turned our gins carbon negative. And, you know, obviously like energy and, you know, how much botanicals you use, that all contributes quite, it's minimal in terms of when you take the overall sort of footprint of a gin, which is usually the base spirit and the glass packaging. But in terms of the distillation, it was much, much lower because it's super efficient in terms of how much alcohol you can get from it. Low energy, low water use, closed loop system. So you're not using fresh water and putting that to drain. It's continually recycling. So there's definite advantages there in terms of, you know, kind of energy. And they're small. Like, I really like that. It was one of the main things which appealed to me. You know, mine's a 5-litre benchtop rotary evaporator. So for somebody new to distilling gin, that was a real benefit because I could get my head around that. It was a manageable size. And I'm an ex-scientist, so I was kind of immediately drawn to a scientific piece of equipment.
Nice, thank you very much. You've touched on a lot of advantages there, so that's really good. To be constructive, I feel we do need to look at disadvantages as well, for people considering taking it up. So looking at disadvantages, I'm trying to think who to come to here. Maybe Chris, have you, I know you've done a lot of experimentation with things. Is there anything you can give us in the way of disadvantages?
Yeah, sure. I mean, there's the obvious, these pieces of equipment are very expensive, but also, you know, we've got that sort of, we're getting 9 litres of distillate off of, you know, an 8-hour period versus 200 litres off of the copper pot still. So volume wise, we get a lot less. I mean, maybe we could intensify the botanical quantity and sort of do a more concentrated distillate, but you know, in terms of volumes, we obviously get much less. Touched on the costs, but you know, I feel there's a lot less pieces can go wrong with the copper pot still than they can do with the vacuum still. That being said, I've never had a major problem with my vacuum still, so fingers crossed that continues.
Brilliant. And Alex, oh sorry, yeah. And Matthew, have you got something to add there?
Yeah, so with the OxyStill, we weren't part of the rotovap gang, so we got a custom-made still made by Bacardi Product Development, which I was then presented with and told to get on with. And what we found is you've really got to respect the liquid you produce, because it's really rich in oils and citrus oils specifically. And what we find is when it's really rich in oils, you can, you know, if you don't respect it and treat it right, you can lose all those lovely molecules you spent so much time trying to get in to the liquid can suddenly come out. So you've really got to make sure that when you come to bulk liquid handling, because we were making sort of relatively large quantities, I say relatively large, but you know, in conventional gin terms, it pales in comparison. But when you're bulk liquid handling and handling IBCs and things like that, you've got to be much more careful and delicate and thoughtful as how you treat that liquid. I don't know if Ian can concur on this front. I feel like, you know, the godfather of vacuum distilling sitting in the corner of my screen here. But yeah, you've got to really make sure when you're dealing with the liquids at like larger volumes, you've got to be very careful what you're doing, because all of those molecules, and also the tendency for slight amount of drift.
So I'll just say one little thing. I'll pass over to Alex. I find the cure to oil separation is to add GNS, and it usually redissolves. Sorry, over to Alex.
Yeah, sorry, just the one thing I was going to say about, you know, obviously with cold distilling is the glass factor. And obviously it's so easy to, when you're cleaning, to move something, break something, which obviously you're not going to have with a normal still. And depending on where you've bought it from, you've either got to have plenty spares of all the different bits of glassware, or have a good relationship that you can get the part very quickly, because obviously one part can be crucial, and that's production stops.
Let's go to Abby first.
Yes, having lots of spares is key. I have broken many expensive flasks, and if you don't have spares as a backup, then that's production downtime. That's it, you're done for the day. You're done for potentially a week or 2 weeks, whatever the lead time is to get a replacement. So and that does all add up to the cost. So cold distillation on a rotary evaporator specifically is my experience, versus you know, traditional pot distillation is really expensive. So for us, the initial outlay, you know, 10 to 12 grand just for one rotary evaporator, plus all of your spares as well. So the cost can rack up, and I know certainly for like repairs and maintenance, again, that can be super costly. Chuck in a couple of grand just for a service on a yearly basis, and that's just for somebody to come look at it, replace a few seals, and then walk off again. That doesn't even cover repairs. So that is a consideration. You know, whilst the flip side, they're fantastic for new product development. You can distill 200 mils at a time. So really fast turnaround for developing new flavors and creating botanical libraries. But the flip, you know, downside is the cost and that kind of extra consideration. And I know, like, we had a major breakdown. So I'd been distilling my gin for 9 months, and then I had like a couple of product releases, product launches that were going out. I had a big contract that I was distilling for as well, and I was overloading my still. So we distill multi-shot, and they're not really designed for sort of multi-shot. So I had a lot of botanicals in there going around. It threw off the center of gravity because the flask rotates. So whilst that makes it really efficient, because it increases the surface area of evaporation, so you get you know, kind of faster distillation, the downside is that it burnt out the motor, because I was doing so much back-to-back distilling, and my machine went kaput. So that meant I couldn't distill anything. I didn't have a backup, so I was out for quite a number of weeks, which had a huge knock-on effect for us. So I learnt my lesson. I've now got a second still, because, you know, that is my only distillation method. So I now have a backup which doubles up as my you know, kind of trial distillations and things, which is great. But yeah, I think that is a major disadvantage for me, is that kind of cost, and just that wear and tear. They're quite easy to misuse. I've heard of a few distilleries who have bought them to for new product development, you know, just kind of trials and things, but have ended up just not using them because they found them too you know, difficult to use, or just not that easy. So they do take a little bit of practice, I think, to get the best out of them, but once you've mastered them, then they're great.
Brilliant. That's actually really helpful advice, I think, for those that are watching. And Matthew, I think you had something to say as well there.
Yeah, it's the main thing is, because the molecules you're extracting are at a lower energy, you're going to have to treat them with more care and attention when you bulk liquid handling, because rather than coming out of solution, they can just full on evaporate out. So when you're handling the liquid, you have to be very, very careful and very delicate, because the molecules are at a lower energy, because you're extracting them under a cold process. So that's kind of just a bit of a clarification and science behind the statement, really.
That's brilliant. Thank you. No, this is why I like the idea of having all of you together, because you're all bringing these different elements. So that's fantastic. Moving on to the next question. I think this might be maybe subjective. I don't know. Is it only for distilling in small quantities? Shall we go to Chris for that one?
Sure. Perhaps I'm not the correct person to answer this question. For the purposes of what we do, we're talking 9 litre of distillates a day. So it is really for small quantities. And thankfully, in our sort of bottle of Heppel, it's 70% copper pot, 25% vacuum stilled, and then 5% CO2. You know, what we're looking for from the vacuum still is those fresh flavors. And thankfully that's balanced. It's not 50-50. One of the products we do, it's 60% vacuum stilled. And thus the price of that product for us goes through the roof. It makes it very expensive for the consumer. So for me, it is small quantities, but I'm sure other members of the panel who solely use vacuum still will not see it for just small quantities.
Exactly. Yes, I think there's a variety in methods in which it's used. So that's why I wanted to address a few people. I think, Ian, if we could come to you.
Yeah, I would say if you scale up, the larger the vessel becomes, the less likely it is that glass is going to be any good because of the breakage risk. But actually, if you look at an industrial oil refinery with a vacuum distiller's eyes, you can see they use that stuff in stainless steel. So we've got a model for how to scale up if necessary.
That's really, really helpful. Thank you. Alex, have you got anything to add to that?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, like I said, we've got the 100 litre rotary evaporator. The most we do to go, we use a multiple shot method, but we'll distill 35 litres at a go. I mean, our capacity, we think with our current setup, 8,000 bottles a month would be fine. Currently, we're not at that level, but if we ever did get to that level, we're happy that we could cope with that.
Brilliant. And yes, Abby, would you like to add something there?
Yeah, it'd probably be worth just clarifying to any of the viewers about sort of multi-shot in case that's a new concept. So with sort of single shot or one shot gin, you have one volume of alcohol with one quantity of botanicals. You distill that, and then the gin that you get out the other side, you dilute it down and bottle it. So you've got, one spirit, one lot of botanicals. That's your one shot. If you keep the same quantity of alcohol, but say double the quantity of botanicals, you have double the intensity of gin that's distilled, and then you can stretch that with more alcohol, so that you then diluting it down to that sort of single shot, and then you can dilute it and bottle it again. So you don't have to be limited to 2 shot. You can go right up to 10, 20. But you are limited, especially on a rotary evaporator, as to what multi-shot you can achieve, just because obviously, like I said, they're quite sensitive and you don't want to strain the motor too much. I mean, you could turn the rotation off as well, but yeah, for us, that's our way of getting as much out of the still as possible. Again, it's energy efficient, it's time efficient, it's less labor, so you get much more from a single distillation, which for us was great, and it means that we can scale up relatively easily. But in terms of if we were to scale up to much bigger volumes, you have the option of either getting a second and a third still and just duplicating exactly what you do, or you can get a larger still, 25 litre, 50 or 100 litre. So it'd be really interesting to hear from Alex whether he started with a smaller still and then went up to 100 litre, or if it was 100 litre straight off, and whether he had any problems scaling up, because it's not like a linear scaling. So the larger you go, the less efficient it becomes, and yeah, you have to tweak the recipe a bit.
Yes, so we did start off with a smaller rotary evaporator, 25 litres, which worked really well. We didn't find that there was major issues with scaling up, even going up to 100 litres. And what we currently still do, we split. So certain botanicals we do in the smaller rotary evaporator, and the bigger quantities we do in the larger one. You were talking about the multiple shot method and overloading the rotary evaporator. It's interesting as well that certainly one of the advantages of the larger one is just the sheer weight and size of it. You get far less sort of wobble, particularly with the rotation when you're loading it up than we do with the smaller one. So we can't proportionally load up the smaller one as much as the larger one. So that is one of the advantages. I mean, if we had time again, maybe we would have gone for 250 litres, but yeah, we're happy with the 100 litres at the moment.
Wonderful, thank you. Now, my next question has probably been covered a little bit in discussing the advantages, but I would like to ask anyway, why did you choose vacuum distillation? I feel I would like Ian to answer this question first, if that's okay.
Yeah, so it's very simple. I started off by fractionally disassembling good quality Bordeaux wine. That's why, before I got into gin. And the idea, after a fair amount of research, was that vacuum distillation was suitable because there's very little oxidative oxygen for obvious reasons, and secondly, there's no heat damage. And I started using liquid nitrogen cold finger, which actually catches a surprising amount of methanol. I'm not sure if it's 1% of alcohol or 1% of the total wine. There's a lot of methanol in even good quality table wines. The interesting thing about that is that essentially carries the bouquet of the wine, so that when you thaw what comes off the liquid nitrogen cold finger, you really catch what you first swirl in the glass. So you've got a low boiling point, I think it's 10 degrees lower methanolic bouquet. So the reason I got into vacuum distillation was simply to dismantle and reassemble different Bordeaux wines, maybe extracting some water, possibly doing a bit of a transplanting of one bouquet and alcohol off a red wine onto a white, or off a Bordeaux onto a Burgundy, or from a Sauternes Barsac onto a white Burgundy. So essentially slicing good quality wines into 4 fractions, the most boring one being the watery fraction, which you can typically throw away, and the interesting ones being methanolic bouquet, which is highly oxidizable. It goes off literally in hours, just as a bouquet of an open bottle of wine. A sort of cold distilled grapperish alcohol level, then there's the water, and then there's the sort of dark tannic liquor with all of the tannins and colour left. And taking those 4 fractions and throwing them into the air and reassembling them. So that's what got me into vacuum distillation. It's only by chance that I decided to do gin after that. And I just wanted to make one point that Matthew was making earlier. Handling those oils which have been distilled under vacuum, I strongly suspect that there are some almost gas-like oils which are still dissolved. Think about crude oil, contains dissolved butane and propane. And I suspect in some of the citrus distillates, we're capturing some oils which actually maybe not the regular hydrocarbons, sort of 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 carbon atoms. I think there might be some much shorter ones. And that's the reason why, for example, my citrus distillates, even as much as you try and cap them tightly, and I'd be interested to hear what the best, whether it's polythene or aluminium, you come back to them, and inevitably after a few months you see the levels gone down. And I wonder if that's something going on like that.
That sounds like an interesting conversation to be had. Maybe, yeah, over a pint someday when we're allowed to have pints. Yeah, I think there's all kinds of conversations we could have, Ian. Don't worry.
Fab. And yeah, coming back to the choosing vacuum distillation, Abby, I know you've already touched on some of why, but considering you started with that straight away, is there anything that you would like to add as to why you chose that as the right thing for you?
I wasn't even going to bother making gin. We were very much a whiskey focused distillery. That's why we exist. And at the time, you know, it was a super crowded market. People were making some really good gins. They were also making some rubbish gins. And I thought, you know what, there's not really a lot we can bring to the marketplace that would be unique, that would be, you know, different, or that would have any kind of unique selling points. It wasn't until I came across a cardamom distillate, which had been produced on a vacuum still, so it'd been cold distilled. It blew my mind. I'd never tried a vacuum distilled gin at that point. So this was this like whole kind of really fresh, vibrant flavor. You know, the spirit, it was like biting into a cardamom pod. And I thought, wow, that's pretty intense. I like this. And it was coupled with the fact that we had local lavender. My father's a beekeeper, so we had our own honey. So that was a really natural pairing. And I think in my head, it was like, well, actually, if we can harness the flavour of the lavender and those botanicals, and we can really develop a recipe around the cold distillation concept, then maybe we would have something that I can kind of get on board with and that would be a little bit unique. So I'm really, really glad we did, because even though gin wasn't our main, our main product, that's not what we were focused about. It's grown really, really well. So I'm super glad that we did decide to go with it. And all of my gins have been made using cold distillation. And from the multi-shot, I started with the multi-shot to begin with, because I knew that if I had any chance of making any money from the gin, I would have to do it at a certain scale. And we're still small, don't get me wrong, we are very, very small, but we are nowhere near maximum production capacity at all, even with one still, let alone two. So, and I think because I went straight in and developed my recipe around multi-shot to begin with, that set me off, on a good footing, I think. So yeah, for us, it's really good for those like more floral botanicals. We do a lot of distillation for Michelin-starred restaurants, so we use fresh flowers that are picked, are distilled on the same day that they're picked. Fennel pollen, all of those super, super delicate flavors that would just otherwise be destroyed with heat. So that's definitely an advantage. And I just like it. It's fun. It's different. It's unique for some people. Loads of people still haven't heard of cold distillation. So certainly when it comes to the tours, people kind of love it. I think it's really Breaking Bad, my kind of gin lab corner. So it is, it's good to look at. It's interesting. It's fun. And it's a learning curve as well. You're kind of teaching people about this new method, which, it's not new when you think, Ian's been doing it for over a decade now, but it's new to them, because this might be the first cold gin that they've ever tried. So certainly in terms of engaging your drinkers and your followers, it's really cool.
Brilliant, thank you. You've actually touched on my next question as well, so I'm going to sidestep nicely into that one. I think this is going to have different answers across the board. It's quite a personal question. What was it like to research and build your setups, and what were your early results like? Let's go to Chris first on that one.
Sure. So, having used it at Sipsmith, it was really a case of just getting my head around the much more expense and the glassware, and definitely not trying to break it while cleaning it. And then the early research was, we're based on a 4,000 acre estate up at Heppel, and it was really just with Val, one of our co-founders, picking bog myrtle, lovage, Douglas fir, and just seeing what was out on the estate and what we could use. And then it was a sort of case of we didn't want to do a sort of Heppel 65 gin or anything like that. We really just wanted to see what worked really well through the vacuum still. So the sort of the more the leafy, the blackcurrant leaves, the lovage, the more delicate botanicals that really worked. So the research was a great fun element, and just we would try things to a little 5-litre copper pot still, and then test them against the vacuum still. And the botanicals that we ended up using were just the flavour was so much more complete through the vacuum still than the copper pot that we used, that we just knew that directed us to which botanicals we put through the vacuum still versus what we put through the copper pot still, really. So it was a lot of fun, the research. A bit time consuming, but a lot of drinking was done, so it was good.
Always good. And yourself, Alex, have you got anything to add to that?
Yeah, I was going to say, when we originally started off, we hadn't had any training, and we literally took a leap in the dark. And we heard all about it, and we know Ian's story and tried his gin, and we knew it was for us, because if I sum up characteristically, I think the gin has brighter flavour notes and a cleaner finish. And I think any gin that you try that's cold distilled, those characteristics are there. So we decided on it, and we actually bought our first rotary evaporator from China, and it's absolutely worked solidly. But I don't know if you've ever bought anything from China. It literally had no instructions. It was like one A4, and we spent 3 months putting it together and slowly getting to grips with how it all worked. And it was literally just trial and error. And our very initial sort of attempts at gin making, we started to get slightly concerned because it didn't taste great at all. But then slowly we started to work everything out, started to get all the proportions. Like you say, you can develop things so well, and having all of these different distillates that then you work out the measurements with those, I think it is an easier way to get your flavor profile right. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. That sounds like a real labour of love there. So well done. I did also want to ask, this is maybe me being more nosy than anything. Are there any botanicals that you thought would work well that didn't? And any other surprising results? Because I guess that's all part of the experimenting. I didn't know if there's anything that you remember as a particular, oh, I thought this was going to be great, and actually.
Well, something I thought would distill quite well, but just didn't, was beautifully fragrant fresh rose petals. And I've come to the conclusion that the oils, or possibly even waxes in there, are quite low vapor pressure. You can smell them, but it's very difficult to distill them. And I think possibly they might be better with some kind of supercritical carbon dioxide extraction or something like that. So that, it was not that it was bad, it just didn't really work out. I'm a bit disappointed with cocoa nibs and chocolate. That doesn't seem to distill very well. Not quite as lame a result as with the roses. Someone told me that there is a stereoisomer of one of the orris oils in rose oil, but I'm not sure that's really the critical one. I mean, most of these aromatics are mixtures of hundreds, if not thousands, of molecules which contribute. And sometimes, for instance, you might think that limonene, if you look at the analysis of most citrus, it's about 60 or 70% limonene. But you know what, limonene smells of one thing. Why does a mandarin smell different from a tangerine or a kumquat? It's the other things in there. It's not necessarily the gross quantities. So I think something like roses probably the same thing applies, and I'm just not capturing something with a high enough vapor pressure.
Great, thank you. And Abby, do you have something to add to that?
Yeah, when I was developing my herb gin, I was really excited I really wanted to use some English hops in there, just to give it a bit more kind of provenance, and I thought I'd get some really great flavour from it, but absolutely not. English hops produce like cheesy feet, onion, it's like Monster Munch flavour. Yeah, so I was really, really disappointed, and even in really tiny quantities, done as cold as I could get it, just ruined the gin. I have tried other hops, like American hops, and they have been better, but still nothing has made it into the gin yet. But I have distilled beer, and that does, obviously, good beer. That's quite surprising. Get some really interesting notes with that, which was quite cool. I was really disappointed with licorice. Didn't get any flavour from that at all. I tried all sorts of different methods, steeping, boiling it as much as I could, and I got nothing. So it'd be interesting to see whether any of you guys have had any, found that the woody botanicals definitely, I think, need more heat to bring that flavour out. But yeah, licorice I couldn't get to work at all. I was quite surprised that with my recipe, I didn't need to make any cuts at all. So cuts being where you kind of disregard the first and the last parts of the distillation. The first part's where you get really, really heavy oils. So generally you would take those out, or at least take some of them out. again, to stop kind of looshing and cloudiness. But yeah, I found that if I took the cuts, then I lost quite a lot of flavour. So I keep everything in. I don't make any cuts at all, which was nice because obviously it reduces the kind of labour intensity involved with it. And yeah, but I think generally for me, I found that the distillation process is a bit softer. You have to push the extraction a bit more. So it'd be interesting to see whether, especially for you, Chris, whether you've found that with the woodier, hardier botanicals, if you get like a less of a flavour intensity versus the hot copper pot.
Yeah, I think definitely things like sort of cassia bark, cinnamon, for me, there wasn't much point of putting them through the vacuum still, but definitely through the copper pot still. And I'm definitely in agreement with the hops. I tried 3 different hops thinking this is going to be incredible, and nothing. Nope. Hops are not good.
Good. I'm glad it's not just me then producing monster months distillate.
Ian, I think you had something to add as well.
Come and visit me sometime. Distilled licorice root, angelica, cinnamon, cassia. The difference between cold distillation and hot distillation, I get fantastic results. They were some of our best distillates.
That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, for me, it tends to push to the more floral side with things like the angelica. You know, it pushes that. But if you're wanting that kind of earthy, woody, for me, it was a little less prevalent in my gin.
Right. I think we're getting close to time now. So just as a final note, I think if I could ask each of you just for a final thought and what advice you would give to somebody, your main point of advice for somebody considering taking up cool distillation. If we could start off with yourself, Alex.
So definitely, I think if you want to develop lots of different recipes, if you want to use a lot of fresh and delicate flavors, herbs, cold distillation's definitely the best way forward. I think a lot is also, it needs to be chime with your brand as well, because obviously if you're trying to have that old sort of classic gin look, it might not be the sort of contemporary method you need to use.
That's brilliant, thank you. And Abby?
Definitely, first thing, what style of gin do you want to make? You know, it might not be for everybody. Taste lots and lots of cold distilled gins, taste lots of hot distilled gins, see which one you like the best, which one you want to make, because ultimately you've got to make it and sell it. So you've got to be 100% on board with it. And you have to love it enough to push through the breakdowns, the broken glass, the issues of scaling, the size, all of those things. You've got to really want it. So yeah, the style of gin and the scale. Do you want to take your gin global? If you do, maybe a vacuum still's not going to help you get there very quickly, or it's going to be very expensive. Think about, is it going to be your only method of distillation, or is it going to just feed into hot pot distillation? Is it just going to be for a couple of select botanicals that perhaps you want to champion the flavour of, in which case it's just going to be a secondary still. Again, I said about being able to very quickly and efficiently trial flavours. So do you want it just to do that? So I think it's all about space as well. If you're quite short on space, it's a really good way to get up and running relatively quickly, I think, because they're a really small footprint, especially for a benchtop one. But yeah, ultimately, like scalability and cost. How much money do you want to throw at it?
Brilliant, thank you. And yourself, Chris?
Yeah, I'd say visit as many as you can when allowed. The great thing about the gin industry is that we're all pretty good friends, and we're all pretty open up, to help each other. But really focus on what will differentiate your cold distilled gin from the wonderful gins that are already out there. And really, visit as many as you can and really focus on that unique selling point.
Fantastic, thank you. And Matthew?
So yeah, as a scientist and a nerd, it's always great to see an extraction technique that has science really on its side and done well. I think cold distilled gin can be really something quite exceptional. And once you get to know how the limitations and how you can know what you're doing, basically you can create a product that's really quite exceptional. So it's something that definitely I can see there being a growth for in the future, and yeah, I look forward to tasting some of the results of the experimentation of these disruptive influences as in the market that we have in front of us. So yeah, excellent.
Brilliant. And for yourself, Ian?
I think I'd buy a benchtop rotovap and distill individual botanicals, build up a library, and don't necessarily focus on gin. It's a very, I've seen a few examples recently where some person, which I can't discuss, has managed to sell £1,000 worth of gin in the past year. And I just wonder how much space there is, and maybe not to, I mean, why not vermouths? Why not spiced rums or whatever it might be, but maybe do it for love to start with a limited budget, and churn out 50 or 100 distillates and get to know your way around.
That's great, thank you so much. So yeah, just to wrap things up, thank you so much for everybody for joining me today. I'm geeking out a little bit here. It's a really cool panel. Thank you so much. I hope it's been really helpful for everybody watching. And yeah, we've got a live Q&A for the live event that has yet to be arranged with the dates and times, so we will speak to you guys to see if you can make it. So if you've got any follow-up questions, do tune into that and feel free to pop them over. Okay, thank you so much. Take care. Bye-bye.